Hello friends, welcome to EPG Pathshala, subject of information technology in paper distributed application development. This module is about Java API for HTTP. In this module, we will learn about the Java API related to HTTP protocol, how to write code in Java to connect to any HTTP server, send a request and receive the response. In this module, we will be looking at using HTTP protocol from a Java application. That is, we would like to be writing a client side from a Java application, a HTTP client from a Java application. That is, a Java application which should be able to create a HTTP request, send it to a server, receive a response from the server, and then maybe, no, it's not necessarily that whatever response comes should be rendered. The browser is like that. Yes, browser has been trained to do it, but as far as a Java application is concerned, it could use it for any purpose. Maybe it can do the parsing of the content. There could be various uses of whatever comes from the as a content from the HTTP protocol. Fine. Fetching content from any URL from within a Java application. So let's look at this module. Fine. How do we do such things from a Java application? And so let's explore. Fine. So here we already know about the HTTP protocol. Fine. Okay. So let's see what we can do from Java. Fine. So from a Java application, yes, if you want to explore any, our idea here is to be able to get the content from any given URL, which is a HTTP based URL normally. Fine. It could be other URLs also, but fine, we'll concentrate more on the HTTP URL. So if we want to fetch any content, fine, we have some classes which are part of the java.net package which can help us do this. Fine. In the java.net package, one of the classes is the class which we will have to begin with is a class called URL. Fine. A URL, yes, as we all know, what does a URL represent? It represents a resource or any host. Okay. What is the syntax and what's the information available in a URL? The syntax for a URL, yes, it normally starts with protocol. Fine. So for example, we normally have a URL begin with HTTP, and that's a URL, or fine, colon, then slash, okay, fine. And then the next part is, okay, what's the next? Oh, we normally give a host name. Oh, but it's also possible someone to include authentication here, or authentication related, who's the user, right? For example, you could be saying some username @ and then give the host name. Fine. Okay. So fine. Or if you want to include even the password information, it would then have to prompt for the password because you didn't provide the password. You're only giving the username. So maybe there's a resource which requires authentication. So in case that's if that's the case, you could be doing this. That is, in the URL itself, you could be including the user information, that is username, colon, and a password followed by @ and then give the host. Fine. So it could look like http colon / username colon password. You don't want to include password as part of it, it's fine. It would then prompt you for the password. Fine. Okay. @ fine, because you have used a username, and then the host name. Fine. If you are not providing user information, it's straight away the host name. Okay. / and then the path to the resource which you would like to have. Fine. Many times these resources are such which are nothing but some application. They trigger some kind of a application component to be triggered on the server side to execute some things. Okay, so such processes on the server side which receive HTTP request may actually also like to have some parameters coming to them, some input parameters, and therefore a URL, a HTTP URL can also be including after the resource path, fine, that is some kind of a path slash, you can have any kind of level of hierarchy slash various levels may be created, and you specified a file kind of a file name kind of a thing, and then you can say question mark if you would like to have a input parameters being made available to that resource, fine. You could include that by using key value pairs, giving a name to the resource, name to the parameters. So you could say question, what we call this as a query string. So a query string would be made up of question mark followed by some parameter name equal to the value of the parameter. If you have multiple such things, multiple parameters, we'll have to separate them by each such value pair, key value pair, by a ampersand. Fine. So that's one thing. So a URL can have, so what does a URL have? Oh, it has a protocol. It can have user information. It can have host. It can have port number. Yes, it's optional, but fine, by default it would be port 80, but you could include a port number. It could have a path. It could have a file at the end, and then it can also include a query string. Or sometimes, you don't have a query string. It might be a HTML file. In case of an HTML file which is being referred here, you might also include a reference like hash and some reference. Fine. So a URL looks like this. A URL has these kind of various things. Okay. So yeah, the first step, yes, you should be creating an object of the URL class. Fine. URL has various the various constructors available. The simplest thing would be you can create a URL by just specifying the whole string as a simple string. So some HTTP string, the URL string can simply be used to create an object of URL class. Or you may provide some information in various parts. So there are various other constructors available, fine, where you can specify the name. Fine. For example, you start by giving the protocol. So various parameters. The constructor for URL can include protocol, host, port number, and path. Fine. Okay. So there are various overloadings of this. So yeah, you may like to include the port. You may not include a port. Fine. Fine. So various constructors are available to create an object of URL. Another constructor which can also be many times be useful is a constructor where if you have an existing URL object, a URL, what is it? It is representing some resource. It's representing up to some path. A directory path is there, and within directory path there is some file which it is representing. Okay, so if you wanted to create another URL for a file which is in the same directory, you already created one URL which is representing a path, right? So you could create a new URL relative to an existing URL also by just specifying two parameters. The first parameter would be a URL, and second parameter is a specification which is relative to the given first parameter URL. So URL can be created by using another URL also and create a relative URL from there. Fine. So that's various ways of creating a URL. Okay, now coming to the point. Our interest is to fetch the content from net, from internet. Fine. There is some image. I like that image. That image is available from http:// or I have the whole path something.jpg. Okay. If I know that URL, my interest is to be able to download that and copy it in my place. It could be an image that I'm looking for. It could be any other kind of things. My interest, send a HTTP request from a Java application, get the content. Okay, how do I create a request? Your request, first part of the request, yes, there has to be a URL which is to be created. Now, okay, so fine. So let's say we got our URL created for us. Fine, you got an object of URL. So now in order to make a request, okay, there is another class which is useful for dealing with HTTP protocol. And not only HTTP, it can also deal with some other protocols useful for getting the content. Okay, so in this case, there is this class called URL connection. Fine. How do we get an object of URL connection? No, you don't use the constructor here. Fine, the constructor here is protected. You can't create object of URL connection by simply calling a constructor. To get an object of URL connection, on a URL instance, you have this method called open connection. And if you call the open connection method, it would return us the object of URL connection. This URL connection object can then be used for making a HTTP request and getting back a response for our request. Okay, so what does this method look like? This method name says open connection. So what do you think it's happening? It gives an impression that it has made a connection to whatever URL we have given. Oh no, it's not like that. Fine. This method does not actually make any connection to the URL. We have in our URL the host and port, every information is there, but no connection is done by the open connection method. The open connection method is simply creating a URL connection object. In this phase, the first part of our the first phase here is this object which we have got of URL connection has not yet made any connection at all. Okay, it is the object which has capabilities of managing information related to a request and a response both. It is single object containing information related to request as well as the response part. Okay, so just a creation of such an object is what is happening with the help of method open connection. No connection is actually, it's not made any net connection. There's no socket opening or anything happening in this method. The name may give such an impression, but that's not the case here. Fine. Now, yes, what is our intention? We have seen earlier in the HTTP protocol, there is a format of the request. Okay, so yes, we are interested in sending a request to the server now and getting a response back from it. Fine. So first part would be, we would be now interested in setting up the response. Setting up the request here. Okay, to set up the request, yes, what are the things? We know the format of the request. There is a method. Fine. Okay, one more point here. The URL connection class here is slightly general one. Okay, in the sense, it is not used only for HTTP protocol. It is also useful for other protocols. For example, it could also be used for the FTP protocol. Fine, to fetch a resource from FTP using FTP protocol. Fine. So there are certain things which are specific to HTTP. If you are looking at certain things which are specific to HTTP, you won't find them in the URL connection class. URL connection has a subclass called HTTP URL connection. It is here that you will find things which are more specific to the HTTP protocol. URL connection is simply a general purpose class which is meant for anything, any kind of a protocol which is having exchange of content, where content is going to come from a server. Fine, where we can send a request and get some kind of a content. Fine. So as a client, yes, I'm interested in fetching some content from a URL. Okay, fine. So certain methods for certain purposes, yes, you may have to. Now when you say open connection, if the URL starts with HTTP, yes, in that case, the URL connection which you get is not the object of URL connection. A URL connection as such is actually an abstract class. HTTP URL connection is the object which would actually be created. Right? So actual instance which you will get is actually of the HTTP URL connection. So when you say open connection, to get an object of URL connection, you can, knowing that yes, in our protocol, if we have mentioned HTTP, you should be able to easily cast it into HTTP URL connection and use the methods from HTTP URL connection. Fine. Okay, so let's proceed and look at what are the things which we can use now. The first part I mentioned was setting up the request which we would like to send to the server. To set up the request to be sent to the server, yes, what were the fields? If you look at HTTP protocol, the first field was the method. Okay, so you are interested in specifying the method. So we have this method called set method, set request method. So we have a method called set request method, by which you can specify, no, I don't want to use the get method, because by default when you get the URL HTTP URL connection object using the open connection method, it would be having get as the default method name. So if you want to change the method as post, because maybe you want to be posting some attributes, find some parameters to the server, okay, in which case just simply change you find. So see, our open connection has not actually made a connection or sending any kind of a request. It has simply created an object where you are now actually setting up the whole request part. In this request, the first line, we understand we should be allowed to change the method. Fine, so that's what you can do. The URL, from the URL, the resource has been picked up. Fine, in the first line we know the resource has to be there, so that's already decided by the URL. Fine, and protocol version would be used from your by default it should be just 1.1. You can't change that. Okay, and then the headers. Oh, you are interested in setting up the header. Fine, so the headers for the request, there will be several headers, but you should have a method called set request property to set up the headers. Set request property is what you can use for setting up various headers. Headers are key value pairs. So just create whatever headers you would like to, any additional headers you would like to have, you can always add them. Fine. So this phase after the open connection is where you are actually in the phase of setting up your request. Fine. So setting up headers is done. Fine. And then what? Oh, when does it actually make a connection? Oh, for making a connection, yes, in the URL connection class we have a method called connect. Oh, only when you make a connect, when you call the connect method, it should then be sending the request to the server, getting the response back from the server, and whatever information is received from the server is also collected in the same URL connection object. So URL connection object, think of it, it has information, it is capable of storing information which is related to the request as well as the response part. It has various states. Initial state, it is in the request setup state, then it would be in the connected state. Fine, it is making connection and then someone might even close it. Fine, so once it has made connection, connected means, yes, once you say connect, it would make a connection, not only making connection there, making connection, sending the request, receiving the response and storing the information from the response there. So this is what the URL connection object will have. Okay, so the methods available in URL connection, we have various methods, as we have seen some of the methods which are usable in the request setup state. In the request setup state, for example, we will be able to allow to set up the request method. Fine, set request method. We should be allowed to set up the request property. Fine, and then okay, oh, in case our method is a post method, we should be able to add some content into it. Oh, we want to have some content going to the client, right? Because fine, this is a HTTP protocol, as I said. Okay, it should be capable of exchanging content. So there is some content which is to be sent by client to the server. So how does he manage it? So if there is some content to be sent, mainly because of a post request, then okay, we need to have a fine, we need to be putting the, we need to have an ability to put the content into the URL connection object. So URL connection is providing us with a method called get output stream. Yes, the method is get output stream. Fine, it is giving us an output stream which will allow us to write a content into the URL connection. Fine, but this has to be done in the request setup state. So we have a request setup state where possibly what are the things to be done? You might be interested in changing the method. You might be interested in changing the headers, setting up some headers, which is a request property, and you may be setting you might like to set up some content which needs to be sent to the server. That can be obtained by using that you can do by writing to the output stream of the URL connection. You will be able to get the output stream of the connection by using the get output stream method. So there is a get output stream method in the URL connection to enable you to put some content into it. Fine. So with this way you should be able to set up your request. Once this request has been set up, you call the connect method. Calling connect method sends a request, fine, receives the response from the and waits for a response from the server, receives the response. Whatever response is received is also managed within the URL connection object. So in the URL connection object, we will have methods like, oh, I want to know the status of what happened to that response. Oh, we know in the HTTP response there is a status. So we have method like get response code. Fine. We'll have methods to get the headers from the response. Basically, there are methods to get headers. Fine. So there are various methods which will allow you to get the headers from the URL connection object. These methods are nothing but reading the information which is after the connection has been made and the response has been received. So once the response is received, we have various methods which could then be used. Oh, what happens in case I use a method called get response code? I want to know the response code. I'm still in the setup state and I have not called the connect method. Oh, what will happen? Will it give me an error? No, it doesn't give an error. Here, remember one thing. Whenever we use any method which is related to the response part, fetching information from the response part, what will be done by the URL connection object is it will first do a check. Oh, what is my state? Have I already obtained the response? If I have not already obtained the response and he is asking for information which is related to the response, then I need to first, whatever is the current state of the request, find request related information, send a request, fine, receive a response, and then return whatever he is asking for. So we don't necessarily always need to call a connect method explicitly. Using any method which relates to the response, fetching information from the response, will always trigger the sending of request and fetching the response if it has not already been done. If the response has already been received and you are using any such method, it's fine. It can straight away give you that information. So that way, the HTTP URL connection is able to manage both the request as well as the response related information. Fine. In this response, what have we received? Oh, main thing. Yes, there are various things like we wanted to know the response code. Fine. We wanted to know some of the headers. Fine. Check on the headers. What are the headers which has been received from there? Oh, we might. But the main thing which we were interested in was nothing but the content part. Fine. Oh, I would like to read the content now. How do I read the content? Oh, for reading the content, we would have a method called get input stream. The get input stream gives us an input stream which allows us to start reading from the content which has been received in the response part. So we have two parts in our URL connection. There are two streams we can see. There is one output stream, but this output stream relates to what you would like to. This output stream is there to allow you to put the content to be sent to the server, and the input stream is the one which is allowing you to read the content which has been received from the server. And so fine, our interest was to read the content which has been received from the server. So this could be achieved this way. Fine. So in order to have a Java application which can fetch the content of any resource, it's quite simple. The steps are very simple. First, have a URL object. Next, use the open connection method. You'll get a URL connection object. On this, you decide whether you would like to change some parameters. Fine. Add some headers or change the method. Okay. Do such things. Oh, if it is method change, maybe you are setting the method to post method, in which case you would also be interested in setting up the content. If you are interested in setting up content, fine, you will need to use the method called get output stream, and then use that output stream object to fill the content into the URL connection object. Fine. Once the URL once this has been done, you can use explicitly the connect method or use any method which is related to the response, which is asking for any information from the response. You could first, maybe you would like to first check on the status. Fine. So what's the response code? Fine. Check with the method for getting the response code. Fine. And then once you use any method from there, even if no connect method has been done, the request would have been sent and received by the URL connection object. Oh, there are a few shortcuts also. You need not always go on to get the URL connection object. If it's only that, okay, I'm using the get method, I don't need to change the method, I don't need to change any parameters or anything, nothing to be done on the request side, no changes, whatever by default I'm getting the get and the URL, the resource which has been mentioned, the URL. If that's good enough for me, and I'm only interested in getting the content from the server, I can simply use the URL class itself. That also has this method called get content, right? Or it also has the method called getting the output stream, getting the input stream, so that you can directly, so getting input stream even from the URL class, okay, will allow you to fetch the content of the content of the resource from the server. Fine. And okay, so that's how from Java you should be able to make a connection and get a response for it. Okay, and fine. Okay, so fine. You could try out a very small exercise. For example, what you can try out here is fine, write a small Java application where we have, for example, we create first the URL object. Fine. We can decide some URL. Maybe there's a URL for maybe the Google image. Fine. Just check what is the URL. Fine. Use it to create the object of URL connection. Create the object of URL using that string which we have for the URL corresponding to some image available. And then what you can do is, fine, write a very small code which just says, okay, let's get the URL connection object from it. Fine. Open the input stream, open the input stream from it. Fine. So get the input stream from the URL connection object and write a code which keeps on reading from this input stream and writing to a file. So fine, you can, it's a very simple code which can be written for reading from this input stream and writing to some file. So you could actually create an image file from some image which you know exists somewhere. So it's like, oh, you should be able to download any kind of content you like. Fine. You just need to know the URL, and the content for that URL can always be downloaded using the URL connection class. The input stream of the URL connection can be used for that purpose. Fine. Okay. Fine. Fine. So I think that, so let me just summarize this. So fine. So what we have seen here is, we have seen that we have a class called URL, fine, which represents a URL. We have seen the various parts which go in a URL. We have seen the various we have seen the URL connection class. Yes, URL connection is an abstract class. The actual class object which would be created would be the object of the HTTP URL connection. Fine. And then in the HTTP URL, the URL connection is capable of managing both the inputs, the request side and the response side. Single object contains information related to both request and response. The request is the one which is allowed to be set up, whereas response part is the one which is not, you can't change that. That is something which is obtained from the server side and is available for fetching from the URL connection object. As far as the content part is concerned, for content we are it's making available stream object. So it's making available an output stream object so that you could create your content